Hey there, Podcast Aquanauts. It's your host, Casey here. You know, there was a time in my life before joining the Aquarium family when I felt fairly disconnected from nature. For years, I was living a mostly carless existence in downtown Chattanooga, which isn't a huge city by any definition, but it's got its fair share of traffic jams, tall buildings, and other persistent reminders that you're in an indisputably man-made space. Navigating my days on foot in this concrete jungle, it seemed like the only reminders of the natural world were the smattering of parks I wandered through or the tree-lined ridges snaking along the distant horizon. It was easy to feel in those moments like humans were the sum total of all creatures in my life. Or at least, so it seemed. The truth is, wherever you are, nature is rarely completely absent. You just have to pay attention to it. As I was wandering around, feeling so out of touch with wild things and wild spaces, I was neglecting to notice the activity going on all around me. From patches of mushrooms pushing up along concrete-bordered berms to squirrels playing chase in trees along busy streets. More than anything, though, I was absolutely blind to the birds. As is generally the case, they were everywhere. Dog-fighting and pinwheeling overhead, roosting in every available nook and cranny, snatching discarded food from outside restaurants and parking lots, cozying up to each other in chattering, orderly rows along power lines. Birds are probably the variety of wildlife with which we spend the most time in our life, excepting perhaps bacteria and insects like ants and roaches we'd probably rather not notice. But birds' constant presence in our lives can make them almost disappear. To many of us, they can become background noise, a shapeless prop to the hustle and bustle of our day to day. In the case of this episode's special guest, however, nothing could be further from the truth. Kevin Calhoun, the aquarium's curator of forests, more on that epic title later, has been an avid birder for decades and is easily the most passionate, knowledgeable bird nerd in my personal sphere. He's been all over the planet in search of birds to add to his records, and I'm excited to let him share that passion with all of you. Anyway, it's past time for me to get things started. I promise this one will be a hoot. Kevin, let's go ahead and get introductions out of the way. So you have probably one of the coolest job titles, I think, of any place I have ever worked.
I'm the curator of forests, which is kind of confusing to people because it has nothing to do with cutting down trees or anything. But I'm basically in charge of everything that's not fish at the aquarium. So it's the reptiles, amphibians, and the plants, and the otters, and the lemurs, and the penguins. So it's an awesome job.
Yeah, we're actually recording. So today's studio dive cage is in Kevin's office, and I am sitting not 2 feet away from 7 turtle shells beneath. There are lemurs perched on shelves above me, and feathers in the background. It's a very interesting office, Kevin.
Yeah.
Now, you have been here at the aquarium for a pretty long time. You were one of our first employees, right? So when did you start here?
I started in November of 1991.
Okay, and we opened May of 1992.
92, right. So I started basically not quite a year before we opened.
So what did the aquarium look like back then?
It looked like a bunker or a maze. The first time I walked in the aquarium, there was no roof on it, so it's just kind of a concrete maze. And I remember I would come down with our veterinarian, Dr. Keller, who started about a week after I did, and we would just try to figure out how to get out of the building is basically what we did. We could get in, it was hard to get out. So downtown Chattanooga was so different then. It was a lot of abandoned buildings and dead pigeons, and so yeah, it's a huge difference now.
Yeah, it's had a pretty transformative effect on the city and the whole community. It's like you said, it's a very different place than it was back prior to 1992. So before 1992, or before 1991, I guess, what were you doing?
I worked at Riverbank Zoo in Columbia, South Carolina as a senior bird keeper for 7 years before I came here. So if you do the math, I've been in this business for many, many years. And that's where I got my love for birds, where I started bird watching there. And the aquarium was looking for people that had some experience with native songbirds. And I was really interested in native songbirds in captivity. So I applied for that position just because of that. And at the zoo, it's a beautiful little zoo in Columbia, South Carolina, and we had a huge bird collection. I worked with toucans and parrots and all kinds of waterfowl, and it was a wonderful place.
So, I mean, given that we are here to talk about birds, what is, and as I said earlier, and I hope you don't take it the wrong way, but I would consider you like our resident number one bird nerd. You were the person who, when I think of birding, your name immediately springs to mind. So what is it about birds that so captivates you that a lot of your life kind of seems like it revolves.
It does.
around birds.
I really like vertebrates. And reptiles and amphibians were my first love, and they may still be my first love, but if you've been out looking for snakes and salamanders and frogs, it's a hard thing to do. Birds are everywhere. I mean, I tell people, go to Florida. Let's look at the density of egrets and herons. So they're a vertebrate that are just everywhere. Plus, they're so dynamic. They can fly, which is always incredibly intriguing to me and to a lot of my birding friends. So just the fact that you can see birds and hear them all the time is very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, we've had this conversation before that people kind of lament that there's not more wildlife around them. And I think that's almost because birds are so common, such an become just part of the background to our lives.
Yeah, they do, and it's funny because once you learn bird songs and calls, which takes about 10, 15 years, you everywhere you go you hear that. If I play golf, I'm thinking about, on my backswing, I'm thinking about that chickadee you just called, or, once you're a bird watcher, you are always a bird watcher. I'm always looking at birds because there's always birds. I'm in a wedding, an eagle flies over, or it just becomes part of your life. And just the fact they're so dynamic too. I mean, we have birds that migrate through here, going all the way up to, up into northern Canada, going all the way down to Ecuador. I mean, it's so interesting, their migration paths, and they're just amazing animals. They really are.
So here in Chattanooga, then, how good of a location is this for being a birding enthusiast? Are we in a hot spot for birds, or where do we rank?
That's a good question because we do have a lot of birds have been seen in this county. Now, the Tennessee River is a draw for birds, especially for eagles and herons and so on. And the ridges are migratory pathways. So we have that going for us. We have a lot of forests. So we do have a lot of ecosystems and habitats here. But one reason why we have so many bird sightings here is we have so many birders and bird watchers here. And people have been birding in Chattanooga since the 30s and 40s, where they've been actually keeping data and so on. There's a lot of bird watchers here. If you've heard of eBird, which is the online data gathering that Cornell University has started, which is really interesting, by the way, you can see that our Hamilton County is the third most active county with bird sightings in the state of Tennessee.
Really?
So Shelby County and Memphis, which is on the Mississippi River, they cheat. They're on the Mississippi River. Lake County up at Reelfoot Lake are very active counties, but they're both on the Mississippi River. So it's kind of interesting that Chattanooga area, Hamilton County, is the third busiest county in the state.
And to give you some perspective, if you're not a native Tennessean like I am, Tennessee has more than 90 counties. So that puts us in the top 3%, 4% for the entire state, that's pretty incredible.
And I know several people, their goal is to see 100 species of birds in every county. Bird watchers love, and birders love that type of thing, to make lists or have goals to see a certain amount of birds at a certain time, or a certain state, a certain country. And since there are 90 counties, I know 3 people have seen 100 species of birds in every county.
Wow.
Which takes years to do that. But it takes you out to places you never go otherwise. I mean, there's counties that people hardly ever even have heard of. So it's an interesting reason to get out.
So since we're talking to you about birding, your name has come up a couple of times previously in the podcast. In fact, you mentioned eBird. So the first time that your name was uttered, I believe, on the podcast was in our Citizen Science episode, in which we talked about the Christmas bird count. So the Christmas bird count, if you have not listened to that episode, I would advise you to go back and check it out. But if you would prefer a shortcut, that is just the annual counting activity that takes place in a specific location where people who participate look and identify as many species as they can. And you are, for our location, what is the title? What is your role in that for the Christmas bird count?
I'm the organizer and compiler.
Compiler, that's
so I help. It's an interesting. Audubon Society started this back turn of the century, and for a long time, people just go out and shoot birds and on
Happy New Year, shoot an eagle.
Yeah, exactly. They had what's called the side hunt, and it's usually around the 1st of January. They just go out and shoot as many birds as they could. So people thought, well, instead of shooting them, why don't we just go out and see how many birds we can see? And basically, that's how the Christmas count started. So it's actually a 7-mile diameter circle in Chattanooga. And so it's divided up into like a pie where you have several different sections. So I have trip leaders that go out and cover those areas. So we get about 30 people, 35 people that go out and look for every single bird they can find, and every song and every call, and then record it. And they send that to me, and I send the data into Audubon Society, who has a huge database.
So do you have to go through as compiler and verify sightings?
I actually do. But, that's... Most of the party leaders have been doing, some of them have been doing for 40 years, the count area. So they are very familiar with the bird species. So I know them, I know what they know. A rare bird in this area is very well known now with eBird and texting and anyway. So that's not really a problem. But I do watch, if somebody says they have an ostrich in their backyard, I'm going to say, probably not. But mostly the data is really good and easy to confirm.
So as we're recording this, with production schedules being what they are, you're listening to this probably in March. However, it is very early January at the time of this recording. So you have the Christmas bird count really just kind of wrapped up.
It did.
So have you had time to compile data for this year? I mean, how many birds did we see this year?
That's a good question because I have not. The Chattanooga Christmas count was on Saturday, December 14th. And then there was a Marion County count, I believe was the 18th in Marion County. Then we also had the Hiwassee Christmas bird count, which is up in Dayton, Tennessee. It has Ray and Meigs and Hamilton County involved in it. So we've actually had 3 Christmas counts in this area. There's been a lot going on so far. Sometimes, some years, it's harder to get the data from everybody, so I have not gotten all the data in yet. But I will. I'm planning to work on it this weekend, so hopefully I'll know then.
So based on past years then, I mean, what is a typical return for the
Chattanooga count would be high 90s.
That's species or?
90 species.
Okay.
So hitting over 100 is a goal. And we usually about 98, 99, 97, depending on the weather. A lot of times bad weather brings good birds in. If it's 70 degrees and sunny, we won't see as many birds. So we are looking for rain, snow, cold weather is what we want.
Like storms will blow birds away from where they would normally be found.
Yeah, or they just move things around. And so a beautiful day, which we enjoy, is not necessarily a good bird day.
Okay.
Interesting enough, the Hiwassee area only usually has about 90 species, which is, you would think, since they have a much more water. I mean, much of that is much broader river. Hiwassee River is there, Tennessee River, and all the sandhill cranes and all the eagles, you'd have more species. But actually, we have less species.
That's interesting. You and I have, on a couple of occasions, gone up to the Hiwassee Bird Refuge.
Yes.
Which is those were some cold days.
Yes.
Speaking of unpleasant weather, but yeah, it's a little surreal to be, just like 40 minutes north of Chattanooga.
Yeah.
And yet you're seeing white pelicans and bald eagles and all kinds of things.
There's really not a place besides Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge in Decatur, Alabama, which is, you should go see that area too. It has thousands of sandhill cranes and whooping cranes and 4 species of geese. It's a really good gathering place in the winter. But the Hiwassee area, the Blythe Ferries viewing area, there's really nothing like that besides Decatur, where you can see so many sandhill cranes. You can literally see thousands of sandhill cranes, and you can see there'll be a dozen bald eagles flying around. There might be white pelicans flying over. There might be snow geese and Ross's geese. It's a very special place. We're very lucky to have that so close to us.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you doing your backswing, you can identify the sound of like a chickadee call. I had never heard a sandhill crane prior to making that trip up to the Hiwassee Bird Refuge. And boy, once you've heard those guys, it is impossible to mistake them for anything else.
It's a really primeval, ancient sound. It's a very, the trumpeting, we call it trumpeting or bugling. And you'll hear it at night many times because they do migrate very poorly, I might add. They seem to get lost and confused, and you can hear them screaming at each other or trumpeting as they're wheeling around trying to remember what direction they're supposed to be going. But I heard some night before last,
really,
over my house over in Hickson, which is interesting because really there's not migration doesn't really start until the very end of January into February, where they start going back up north.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you still see them, they move from feeding area to feeding area, so you'll still hear them fly over.
So, Kevin, when I describe you as a bird nerd, that it almost implies like you're involved in something that's unusual. Like, look at how strange it is that you like to go out and bird. But the reality is, if in preparing for this episode, I was looking into statistics about how many people do participate in birding in the United States. And whatever number you think it is, I guarantee you it's higher. So when I looked this up, and I'm looking at my notes because there's no way I would remember this. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's Birding in the United States, a demographic and economic analysis, an addendum to the 2022 National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation, really rolls off the tongue, 96 million people in the United States ages 16 and older engage in birding.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That is 37% of the U.S. population within that age group. So of Americans ages 16 and older, that's 37% of them engage in birding. And comparatively, in 2023, a survey of recreational fishing in the United States, which I think I would have assumed was a more common, maybe it's just growing up in the South, I don't know, was a more common activity. 58 million people in America are anglers to one degree or another, whether that's freshwater or fly fishing or saltwater. So birding is massively more popular than fishing, which is really surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, it gets people outside. It gives them an excuse to travel. And most people start looking at a bird out their backyard like I did. The first time you see that towhee or that finch, and it's hard not to get kind of taken in by birds. Like I said, they can fly. They're usually beautiful. They're usually colorful. There's so many different types, colors. And, you know, I've been birding for 40 years as of this year, which I realized that walking over here is like 40 years. Luckily, I was like 10 when I started, which isn't true. But I started bird watching when I graduated from college. So, and when I first started bird watching, there was a lot of bird watchers, but it was much more difficult to find birds. You had to use books to look up birds, and I was getting records and using cassettes and taping bird songs so I could learn them. Now everything's online, and my phone gives me everything I could possibly want now. I mean, there's really good phone apps that have really good identification of birds, and you can look up any bird song anywhere in the world. It's just so much easier, and I think that's been attractive to people, that they can find that information easier. And the learning curve for birds, since there's so many birds in different plumages, different times of year, is quite long. I mean, to really be an expert, it takes many years to learn all their plumages and all their songs, and it's kind of a shortcut now. It's a little easier to learn that.
So plumage meaning the color of their feathers?
The color of their feathers. Like many birds have a different coloration in the spring as they do in the fall.
What's a good example of that?
So a good example would be a scarlet tanager, for example, which is a beautiful bird that lives in our area. The males are red with black wings, and when they migrate up here in the spring, it makes sense because the bright color attracts a female, or also might tell a male to stay out of his territory. So it makes sense for him to be very colorful. But in the fall, he turns green with his black wings. So it makes more sense you're migrating somewhere where you don't want to be seen to change your color. To hide, not be so bright. So, but you have to learn that because many birds look totally different in the spring than they do in the fall.
So in your mind then, as these numbers have ballooned and more people are taking part in this activity that's been a passion of yours for so many years, is that exciting to you that it's been kind of democratized by technology, or does it in some ways cheapen it because they're not having to put in the effort that you did and other people did prior to the advent of smartphones to do things like internalize and memorize all those calls and plumages like you mentioned?
It's mixed, as you said. I mean, it's mostly positive. Now, there's certain birds like owls, like barn owls and so on, that are quite rare, and you should not disturb them because they will leave an area. So it's harder now to not have so many people want to go. They'll love things to death sometimes. They will love things. They all want to go see it. And sometimes that's not the best thing for a certain type of birds, owls in particular.
It'll stress them out, I guess? Or?
It can stress them out. And there's a lot more photographers now. People can afford a pretty decent digital camera now. So almost there's a huge portion of bird photographers out there that are not necessarily that interested in actually the bird watching part. They're interested for that, getting that photo. The good thing about that is now almost everybody can get a picture of a bird. So if somebody has a strange bird at their house, they can send me even something on their phone. There's almost some way to get an image. But digital photography, especially the Canon Corporation, did a good job making their lenses so you can afford them. You can afford a big lens now. So there's a lot of bird watchers or a lot of photographers taking bird pictures.
That's a very relative statement, Kevin.
Yes, I know.
You can afford a lens.
Yeah.
Let's give people some insight here.
Yeah.
When you say affordable bird watching lens, how many hundreds of dollars are we talking about?
Well, we're talking a couple thousand instead of $5,000 or $6,000.
Okay.
So it's all relative.
Very relative.
Binoculars are the same way. I mean, now one nice thing is now, and that's quite relative too, you can get a good pair of binoculars for $300, which sounds like a lot to people, but really, optics are really important. Or you can spend $3,000 on binoculars. And I think the good thing is that since there are so many birds, the equipment has gotten more reasonably priced. So you can get decent equipment at I say budget. Well, I'm talking $500 or $600, and you can get a point-and-shoot camera with a very strong lens for $500. It does an amazing good job taking pictures. I especially during COVID ballooned the number of people that began birding because they were sitting at home looking out the windows, and all of a sudden they were noticing the birds at their feeders and so on, and that blossomed out to having people that became more active looking for birds. And I've met probably, 50 birders in Chattanooga I didn't know existed until after COVID. So that's been really interesting too.
It's really not surprising. I feel like a lot of activities kind of exploded during that time.
And a lot of young people, which is nice because most people think of birders as being old, crotchety people out there with their, really nerdy. But there's a lot of young birders that have come out that are very active and doing a great job.
And so does that give you hope then for the future that it'll continue, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, there's that bird watching is not going away. That's for sure. And I some of the young bird watchers are so good because they do have all that on their phones and stuff. And I'm amazed that I know an 18-year-old kid right now who's an amazing bird watcher. And he's only birding for maybe 8 or 9 years. But you have all that information around you. You have ways to learn quickly.
So when you say amazing, what makes a bird watcher an amazing bird watcher versus someone who maybe would get a lower grade from you?
It helps to have really good eyesight. It helps to have really good hearing. It helps to be able to learn the little nuances of sounds and learn all the little habitats where birds can hide and where they can be found, and to know where to look at what time of year. When we look for the weird stuff that shows up just every few years, and there's certain habitats they show up in, to know where that is and when they could show up, and just knowledge, just getting out in the field. I mean, that's how you learn, is getting out, just birding every day. I have friends that bird every single day, and that's how it's a feel too. You kind of learn, like anything else, of fishing or anything else you do a lot, you just kind of have a feel, and you have there's been times when I just felt like I knew where their bird was. I don't know if this seems kind of weird, but looking at the weather conditions and species have been seen north of us or south of us, and sure enough, I found that species of bird. And so anyway, it's just a combination of knowledge, which when you're 18, it's how do you have time to do that? So they spend a lot of time in the field learning.
So, Kevin, you mentioned young people.
Yes.
How young were you when you first became aware of birds in a way that kind of caught your attention more than just, oh, that's a neat animal?
25.
Really?
Which is pretty late.
That's way later than I thought.
I was out of college, and I always loved birds. I grew up in Western New York. We had grouse and pileated woodpeckers and stuff in our yard. So I enjoyed that. But the first bird I was painting a house in South Carolina. I heard something rustling in the bushes, and I looked down, and there was a beautiful bird that had a big red eye and a black back and a red breast and white in its tail. And I went and looked it up, and it was an eastern towhee, which is a beautiful bird, and I'd never seen it. So that's what really started me. Say, well, if that bird's here, I hadn't seen it before, what else is here? So that's kind of what started me on my And then I actually ended up with some very good birders in South Carolina. They took me under their wing and taught me.
Under your wing.
They taught me. I said, well, where else would it be?
Well, we had to get some puns in here.
You did. I get some puns in there, but under
even
their
if they
wing.
were unintentional.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you worked at the South Carolina, you said aquarium?
Riverbank Zoo. It's in
okay.
Columbia, South Carolina.
What was your job title exactly?
I was a senior bird keeper there.
Okay.
And I really wanted to work for reptiles and amphibians, but they didn't really have any. So I got a job in the bird department, which I don't know anything about birds, but I was willing to learn. And I remember the first day they handed me a wood duck. And I held the wood duck. It's like, man, first of all, it's an incredibly beautiful bird, a male. It looked like somebody had painted it. And I admit I was smitten after that. And I've had a wood duck in my life ever since. We have them here. We've always had a wood duck that I was in my care. So 40 years, or it's been 40 years. Anyway, we had such an incredibly diverse collection of flamingos and ostriches and rheas and toucans and parrots, and I got to hold those or take care of them. So it was pretty easy to get interested in birds.
What did you learn about birds as a kind of animal or a group of animals from working with them that maybe you wouldn't know if you didn't professionally attend to their care?
I think awareness is one thing, that they're much more aware of their surroundings than I thought. Even songbirds and so on. We think of animals as zombies sometimes, but that's not hardly ever the case. I mean, even a chickadee or a titmouse or the birds we had at the zoo knew when I was going to feed them. They knew where to sit. They knew how to get my attention. They knew. So I think that's still true. I mean, with our huge turtle collection here, I think we're all blown away by what we've learned from turtles, even about how aware they are of their surroundings. And just the diversity of birds, the plumages and the sizes and the lengths of their legs. There's so many. We're pushing 12,000 species of birds have been discovered in the world. So that's a lot of diversity among species. And we're still finding birds, believe it or not, especially in Vietnam and Cambodia. They're still finding, in South America, they're still finding species of birds.
Is it just because they're species that are in areas we don't normally
deep, dark jungles? There's birds there's birds that live in strictly bamboo forests or strictly along streams. And yeah, it's just they could be very specific where they live. And if you haven't spent time in those locations, then you don't even know they're even there.
So if there are 12,000 birds worldwide and counting, I could not find a good reliable number for the number in North America. What's the number that people tend to lean on in your circles for?
I think
how many
it's under 1,000.
Under 1,000 for
probably in the 900s right now
for North America.
So it's kind of confusing because there's birds that are very rare that just kind of pop in one time. Especially here in Texas, you'll have a bird that might pop up from, like we had a southern lapwing last year, or a bat falcon showed up, or something that's only shown up once. So the breeding birds, that's a whole different matter. But when it comes to the number of birds that have ever been seen in the United States, I should have looked that up. I think it's the mid-900s. And there are people that have seen over 900 species of birds in the United States, which is pretty amazing.
That is incredible.
Right,
that sounds like you're doing nothing but.
Right, well, that's true. Some people have done nothing but try as many birds as they can in the United States. So in the United States now, the American Birding Association puts definitions on areas because we like to have lists of birds for different regions. So now we have the American Birding Association also includes Hawaii, since it is the United States, but it's not the continental. So that's a whole nother thing.
How often are you actually out going birding just for you?
Well, probably every weekend. I'm out at least for a short time. I live close to Chester Frost County Park up in Hickson, which is an amazing park, by the way. So I'll pop through there, even almost every day when we have time after work. I'll pop by, just drive through to see what's on the river or whatever. So we're always birding. Birders are always birding. So where I live, I'll step outside before I come to work, and just that sapsucker was calling this morning, so I have birds I get attached to because I see them every day. So But I mean, I would say at least once a week, I get out for at least an hour.
And that it sounds like a lot, sitting on the other side of the table from you next to the turtle shells. But as we've mentioned, I mean, the one of the things that makes it such a popular activity is that it's so easy to do because they are everywhere.
Yeah. And you can draw them to your house by having feeders or water sources and so on. So you can sit inside your house, look out the window, and see an amazing variety and species doing that.
Yeah. How do birders feel about couch birding? Is that something that's like looked down upon, or?
So many of the bird watchers, a bird watcher is someone, we say that it's at home watching. It's kind of a passive thing, looking out the window.
That's nicer than couch watching.
And a birder is more of a verb where you're out pursuing birds. But so many interesting birds have been found by people that only sit at their house, look to their window. We had a calliope hummingbird, which is a western species, that showed up for a couple weeks because somebody's looking out the window of their house at their hummingbird feeder, and a weird hummingbird showed up. So many of those bird watchers are ones that find really interesting things that are drawn to their feeder. So we like that. You know, we enjoy the bird watchers. Some people can't get out and do that. They can't afford it, or they have a disability or something. So no, we really enjoy that people are sitting home watching their feeders.
So we've talked about sitting on couches, and we've talked about you going to Chester Frost. But the thing that in my mind elevated you to bird nerd number one is how often you are undertaking journeys.
Yes, it's true.
With an eye to look for birds. So let's talk about where all have you gone in pursuit of birds, or to go and be a birder?
Well, I've been to all 7 continents. My last trip, last year I was in Brazil. I was also in Vietnam, Thailand. There's so many bird species, especially in Asia, but Africa and South America too. So I'm planning trips to India, hopefully next year, looking for tigers and birds.
Literal tigers.
Yes, literal tigers. My friends and I are really interested in everything, really. But birds are the main focus. But if we see a tiger or a cobra or something, we are very happy about that too.
You won't turn your camera off.
I never turn my camera off. I mean, actually, snake photography is my number one hobby after birding.
I did not know that.
I love snakes. And
I knew you love snakes. I didn't realize that photography of them was.
And I've got one more rattlesnake I've not seen in the United States yet that I'm looking for. And
which is
photographed
what?
The eastern Massasauga rattlesnake that lives up in Michigan and the Great Lakes area in Ontario. Yeah, it's an odd snake that lives up there.
Rattlesnakes in Ontario.
There are. And my goal is to see every snake in the United States, which is a lot harder than bird watching. Much more difficult.
So is it just number of species? I mean, I can't imagine there are more snake species.
I mean, how many snakes do you see a year?
Well, that's true.
You might see 3 walking around. I mean, snakes are difficult. They're slaves to temperature and habitat. So I spend a lot of my time in Texas or California looking at temperatures, chasing temperatures around at night. So we bird watch during the day, and we look for snakes at night. Because you road cruise, you go on the roads at night. That's many times in the summer. That's when you see snakes. They're out feeding. They're out moving around because it's too hot during the day. So that's a whole nother. We could talk about that for hours.
Well, we'll have to bring you. We'll have to do it. I mean, I could certainly see another episode about snakes. So we'll have to. We'll revisit. We'll bring you back to the studio dive cage.
But remember too. I mean, with bird watching, you go out to sea. I mean, there's many birds that live out in the ocean too. So I've been in many of the oceans of the world. There are places I haven't been. New Zealand I like to go to. I haven't been there yet.
I know I have been there, and that was really cool.
See, you've got a place I haven't been, which I'm dying to go.
The chewy bird is one of my favorites.
I love Australia. I've been there twice, but I've not been to New Zealand. Malaysia I want to go to. Like I said, I've been to India, but not northern India. So anyway, every country has birds, and they have birds I haven't seen. So I write about 4,000 species of birds, and there's like I said, there's pushing 12,000 birds.
You've seen 4,000?
I've seen close. I'm just under 4,000 species of birds. So,
Kevin, that is incredible.
Well, it just means I've been on a lot of trips.
Well, I mean, and that is incredible.
And I've been out in the field a lot and gone to different parts of the world. So, bird watching trips are there's lots of companies that do that out there, and they do a really good job with it. And that's been going on for 50, 60 years. But there's trips to look at mammals. If you want to go see a Siberian tiger, if you want to go see a snow leopard, there's tours that take you on those now. And now they're doing reptile amphibian trips, which I think is really interesting.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, really interesting stuff.
Well, and again, I make it sound as if you driving somewhere to go or fly somewhere to do birding is unusual, but statistics would suggest that you are actually not even remotely alone. That of the 96 million birders in America, 43 million are considered what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service describes as traveling birders. Yes. So you are one of literally tens of millions of traveling birders.
Over Christmas break, I flew to Seattle area to see a swan. And there's birders there when I got there too. So
you went just to see a swan?
Yeah, I went to see a swan species. It's called a hooper swan. It's from Asia. I'd seen it in South Korea, but I'd never seen it in the United States. So I flew up there. Beautiful. Had a great time. It's just gorgeous up there, and saw the swan. And saw a couple of new salamanders. I love salamanders too.
Well, now you're in a really great location for salamanders.
We are.
You don't have to go very far at all.
Salamanders here are fantastic, but Washington State's really good for salamanders too. So yeah, I will jump in the car to drive to Texas if there's a good bird that shows up. But all I need is 2.5 days, and I can get to Texas and back. And it's 19, 20 hours where I usually go. So it's
just a short drive.
Yeah, it's just we enjoy that. So it's just part of it. It's where you eat. We know where the restaurants are now. I have a favorite restaurant in McAllen, Texas. I have a favorite restaurant. Every town in the United States, I have a favorite restaurant that I've been to probably. So it's eating, it's seeing different parts of the country that you'd never go to if you weren't looking for something specific.
So it's as much about travel as it is about
travel. Yeah, for me it is. I love traveling.
Okay, so like when you're thinking through how do I want to spend my vacation time this year? Where is the priority level in terms of where you're going versus what birds are there? What takes priority for you?
Really, priority is what snake is there right now.
Okay.
But where I plan to go to South Africa this year, and there's seabirds, albatross. There's 6 species I haven't seen in South Africa. There's also African penguins I have not seen, and I've been to Antarctica. But there's birds that live. Temperate species of penguins that live in the Galapagos in southern South America and South Africa too. So we're going to look at African penguins also, and there's just all kinds of cool birds there.
And if you do come to the aquarium, to tie this back into the Tennessee Aquarium, our 2 penguin species, the Macaronis and Gentoos, are both Antarctic Peninsula.
They are.
Correct?
They are. They're not ice penguins like emperors or adelies, but they are sub-Antarctic birds, we call them. They live around Antarctica.
Now, we mentioned you mentioned snake photography, and we talked a little bit about bird photography, but you have taken some incredible bird photos. So, is at this point is the photography element of birding one of its major appeals to you?
I like to get a photo of every species. And I do that because I do a lot of talks, I do a lot of programs. I like to use my own photos. And that's one reason I do snake photography. I did a program at the Aquarium a couple of years ago using my own snake photos. So when I go travel, I don't buy souvenirs really. I take photos of what I see. And I love to get a photo of a new bird. So I do like photographing birds to keep track of them too. It helps me keep track of them also. We do enjoy a great picture of a bird. It's something I like to look. I'll just look through my pictures at night sometimes. Like, remember that trip we took, and just have all the photos we took of those species of birds. And I mean, I'd like to get a photo of every bird in the world. I mean, I've photographed almost 3,000 species now. So, and I have friends that have photographed almost 6,000 species of birds.
Kevin's responding to the quirked eyebrow that you couldn't hear. That at 3,000 seeming like a lot to me.
But then you hit 6,000, it's like, that's a lot of birds.
That is a lot of birds.
Yeah, and for some reason, people in Hamilton County and also Tennessee are really into bird photography. We dominate the bird numbers photograph for some reason in the world. I don't know what that is.
Is that based on what database? Is it eBird?
We use American Birding Association and eBird. Yeah, so we do keep track of what we photograph, and I do that with mammals and everything too. It's not just birds.
I mentioned earlier that your name first came up in the citizen science episode of the podcast, and Stephanie Soto, one of our educators, and I were talking about eBird and about the whole idea of citizen science being that you are an amateur contributing to scientific research by doing something that you're either doing it intentionally or through something like eBird. You might just be passively contributing to scientific research by documenting the things you're seeing that then a scientist can make use of that information. When you're birding, what's in it? Like what is the motivation for you? Is it do you do it? What's the purpose behind it for you?
Well, I like to get out and look for birds. And using eBird, immediately you put that data there, it goes right to Cornell University, which is one of the number one ornithological schools, along with LSU and so on. So
ornithology being the study of birds.
The study of birds, right? So that goes into a database. Every time you go on eBird and enter your data, that goes into a database, which I think is great because that's the ultimate citizen science right there. But all the Christmas count data, all the national migration count data that we turn into the Audubon Society, that all goes in the database too. But for me, I've been birding some of the same areas for 30 years, and some of those areas have stayed pretty much the same. And I enjoy seeing the first scarlet tanager shows up in the spring up on Lookout Mountain. I like to walk the Hardy Trail up there. I enjoy seeing those first arrival birds that are just coming in the spring when they're migrating, or the first winter bird, the first white-throated sparrow that shows up. Or I just enjoy, if the world's going crazy, at least you can, the birds are still showing up when they all show. You said it's just
like the rhythm of nature.
The rhythm of nature is still going on, and it's a little different now. And why that is, if it's global warming, whatever's going on temperature-wise, it has changed some of that. But basically, it's still somewhat predictable. So I enjoy that. I just enjoy looking at the birds. I just enjoy watching them feed and watching them bathe and, watching them do their behaviors and their activities.
I mean, it almost feels like, you've mentioned awareness and kind of the personality of birds. Like, do you feel like they almost seem like they become characters to you? Like you know them almost on even though you're talking about species, like you almost feel like you know them on an individual basis, it sounds like.
Well, when around your house, you'll see the same, like I had a yellow-bellied sapsucker that would show up in the tree by my door, and he'd be there every day when I was leaving, and I would see it all winter. Then I'm not saying it's the same bird, but then one would be there the next year, and you just kind of get attached to them. It's like, hope you're okay, hope the cat hasn't caught you yet, or and it's just interesting to see them going about their lives and their, the things they do. They're so focused on staying alive and getting food, and they're much more focused than we are on those things. And I just enjoy watching them do those things.
Yeah.
And you get attached to. With birds, you don't know if they're the same birds, necessarily, but the same species are in the same places. So you do get kind of attached to seeing them in the same places.
So, Kevin, if someone were to want to follow in your footsteps into the realm of birding, what advice would you give to them in terms of ways to learn about birds, equipment that they should consider getting, places maybe if they're listening within the Southeast that they should consider going to that would be a good place to start learning how to bird?
I do a lot of not a lot, but I do beginning bird watching classes sometimes, and binoculars are everything. And people have binoculars, but they don't know how to use them necessarily. So that's the first thing I always do is say, get some binoculars that you can actually look through and you can focus with, and that opens up the whole world for you there. So that's the most important piece of equipment right there. And just get out as much as you can. You can't beat just going out and looking at birds. And we have the Tennessee Ornithological Society here that has field trips, and learning from other bird watchers or birders is a really fast way to learn. And that's why I was, like I said, put on the wing of some of the best bird watchers and birders in South Carolina and the southeast United States. So I had a chance to learn quickly because I was with the best in the field. But just getting out, use the technology, learn bird songs by listening to the bird songs. Study your apps. There's so many different plumages of birds that we spoke to before. I study still, and I've been doing this for 40 years, and I still study. Before I do a field trip, I just kind of go through everything I hadn't seen in a while and make sure that I'm clear on every field mark of that bird. So you can't stop studying. It's like playing guitar or something. You can't not practice anymore.
Sure.
You know, I mean, and to get good at something, you got to keep it up. And I feel like that's something that I like to do. So I listen every spring before the warblers arrive in the spring. I listen to the bird songs again. And if I'm flying out to Seattle, I'll study and listen to the bird songs of that area, just so I can remember or know what the birds are when I'm hearing them. So you got to put in some work.
How do you listen to them?
Well, I mean, there's several apps. The Sibley Guide to Birds of the United States is an excellent app. It costs $22 or something like that, and it's a book app basically. You put it in your phone and you can scroll through all the different species, and it has songs of each bird from different parts of the United States. Some have dialects. Some owls sound different than they do in Arizona as they do here. So I look at the dialects of different birds. And it's the Sibley Guide just has so many different songs and sounds for it. And I'll listen to all that too. So you can study from your phone.
How do you spell that?
Sibley, Sibley. It's right up there.
I can see it.
Yeah, it's an excellent book.
Roger
Roger Torrey Peterson's Field Guide to Eastern Birds, and I think the Eastern Birds of North America was kind of the first guide that was easy to use and everybody bought back in the 50s and 60s. And he used the old World War II air spotter tricks where putting an arrow on the one thing on that bird that makes it that species of bird. And they did that with aircraft spotting World War II. So you would know if it's a German plane or a Japanese plane. They would put an arrow pointing at what is that thing? What's that flap that looks different than it does? Anyway, so
Kevin is also a student and a fan of history.
I
if that wasn't immediately apparent.
But Peterson's field guides were the first ones that were really usable by the public. So the field guides are getting better and better since, and I think Sibley has done the best job with the newest field guide. That's what I use. That's the app I use.
When I was little, and I am not a birder, I think I have a very surface level appreciation of birds. This conversation has been very interesting to me, obviously, but the Audubon field guide was the one that I had. I don't remember how old I was, maybe 8 or 9 years old. And that sucked me into the world of natural everything. Mm-hmm. And every Christmas and birthday for years, I was asking for a new Audubon field guide on minerals and the night sky and weather and mammals. So that, I mean, in some respect then, even though I am not a birder, birds really were my entree into the world of appreciation of nature. And now this is what I do. So
the Audubon guys uses photographs, and the Sibley guys uses paintings. Mm-hmm. The advantage of paintings is that you are taking every field mark from every bird and putting it on that bird.
You're making a perfect bird.
Right, you're making the perfect bird. Sometimes photos don't show that. So that's the advantage over. But people have said, well, why are most of the field guides painted? And that's why. Because that you can paint that bird, like I said, it's a perfect bird. And the photographs sometimes they hide field marks. The Audubon guides are confusing to me because they put them in weird order. The birds like in colors. They were using like red birds. It's like, well, that's useful as a beginner, but as time goes on, that's not really that helpful. But I think the pictures are nice because people like looking at pictures.
That was the main
They're
appeal
beautiful
for me,
pictures. Yeah. Pictures. So you're right. The Golden Guide was another one that was out. That was a drawn guide. That was a good one. Audubon and then Peterson were kind of the three. The National Geographic came out with a guide. So now there's just endless guides. By the way, I mean, there's so many field guides.
To wrap things up, Kevin,
yes,
would you recommend birding to others?
Oh, of course.
Or is it only for a specific kind of person?
No, I think I have a friend that has a 3-year-old daughter, and we were out the other day, and he had a little tiny spotting scope for her, and she was actually looking at birds. Anyway, any age you can become birding at any age, and I feel like I have friends that are 20 years older than me. I have friends that are 20 years younger than me. And it's kind of, all those boundaries go away. Ethnicity, gender, all that kind of goes away with bird watching. You're birder, so that's what you're there for. So I have very eclectic friends because we have that all in common. And some people, like I said, you can sit at home, you don't have to travel at all. Or you can travel like crazy like I do. So, I mean, it's just, birding has something to offer for everybody, I feel like. And some people don't like birds. I mean, some people are afraid of birds. But there's other things you can look at.
What is that? Ornithophobia? Would that be what that's called?
Really.
Or avophobia?
Well, we have people who are afraid of butterflies. They won't walk through the butterfly exhibit. So there's something for everybody with bird watching, and there's birds everywhere. I mean, I walked outside between the buildings at the aquarium. There's an immature bald eagle flew over. So it's just, there's always birds around, and that's the nice thing about birds.
Perfect. Well, Kevin, let's go ahead and wrap up this episode of the Podcast Aquatic. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that this is an especially fraught time here at the aquarium. We're in the middle of getting accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So I know that carving out any amount of time in your schedule is a very difficult proposition. But thank you for doing so and for being our guest birding expert and resident bird nerd here at the aquarium. I really appreciated it.
Casey, thank you very much. And I'm glad to talk about anything at the aquarium, too. And talking about wildlife and birds is something I really enjoy. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
And if those of you listening to the podcast have an idea for a future episode of the Podcast Aquatic or a question for an expert like Kevin, please do send it on to podcast@tnaqua.org. And while you're online, make sure that you leave us a review or a rating if you can't be bothered to write a review. They're all useful to us in terms of getting us better play with the algorithm, so that's always appreciated. And in the meantime, until next time, remember that every drop matters.